Hello, and welcome to the 19th Century Charitable Association in Oak Park, where it is our vision to be a dynamic cultural center for community learning. I'm Colin Boltz. I'm on the music committee, which is responsible for today's program. Our 30 programs in the Enrichment Series are a part of our mission to strengthen our community through learning, giving and sharing our landmark building. So, David Kasunic is a PhD and musicologist with a principal area of research in the music of Fryderyk Chopin. David teaches at Occidental College, covering courses such as Western music history, opera, music and disease, music and sense perception, and the aesthetics of music. David chaired the Occidental Music Department from 2014 to 2023, and as of July 2024, he's the inaugural director of the John Branca Institute for Music, which is dedicated to the study of popular music and the music industry. So please, everybody, welcome David Kasunic.
Just to disabuse you, I know the source of all suffering is expectation. I'm a historical musicologist by training, so this will be a talk more. There will certainly be music. I'll use the piano a little bit, but it's not going to be a recital per se, but you'll definitely be hearing Chopin. From the time of the Second Partition of Poland in 1793, when Poland was divided by the Russian Empire, the Kingdom of Prussia, and Habsburg Austria, until 1918, so for about 125 years, Poland lacked territorial sovereignty. It is at that time, that Polish music, literature, theater, and art assume an outsized importance to the national psyche. In 1810, Fryderyk Chopin was born outside of Warsaw to a Polish mother and a French father. In November 1830, he was sent off by family, friends, teachers, and an enthusiastic public to make a name for himself and for Poland as a Polish pianist and composer. Upon arrival in Vienna, Chopin received news that young Polish officers, cadets, and civilians revolted against Russian rule, an event known as the November Uprising. The revolt was violently suppressed. Distraught at being prevented from returning to Poland, Chopin ventures on to Stuttgart and eventually Paris, where he arrives in October of 1831. 1830's Paris enthusiastically embraced the Polish cause. Chopin was surrounded by fellow exiled compatriot artists. Paris remained Chopin's home until his death in 1849 at the age of 39. Chopin's Warsaw education forged his adult identity. Central to that education were recent German philosophy and literature produced by a hugely consequential group of thinkers centered in the city of Jena, and who became known as the Jena Romantics. In her 2022 book, Magnificent Rebels, The First Romantics and the Invention of Self, Andrea Wolf-Amad examines how the writings of the Jena set, principally the Schlegel brothers, Fichte, Novalis, Schelling, Schiller, Goethe, Hegel, and Humboldt, conspire to create today's Western notion of self, one that gives centrality to, quote, the self and the value of personal experience, and to self-reflection as the method through which to understand the world, end quote. Here is Wolf on the writer Fichte. Fichte placed the self, the Ich, as it is known in German, at the center of his new philosophy. He imbued the self with the most thrilling of all ideas, free will. This was an idea lit by the fire of the French Revolution. The empowerment of the Ich was as much about the liberation of the individual as it was a rebellion against the despotism of the state. And this radically new concept of an unfettered self carried the potential for a different life. A person should be what he is, Fichte told his students in Jena, because he wants to be it and is right to want to be it. They all believed, as Schelling said, in a revolution brought about by philosophy. The Jena set, writes Wolff, became known as the Young Romantics. In fact, they were the first to use the term romantic in their writings, heralding Romanticism as an international movement by providing not only its name and purpose, but also its intellectual framework. This movement spread to Poland. Again, Wolff. The Polish pianist and writer Maurycy Mosznacki was profoundly influenced by August Wilhelm Schlegel and Schelling and became one of the founders of Polish Romanticism. If we cannot be original, he wrote, then we better imitate the great Romantic poetry of the Germans and decisively reject French models. They were all suffering Germanomania, Adam Mickiewicz, one of Poland's leading poets, said, end quote. In a book devoted to the international reach of the Jena Romantics' thinking, the music of only one composer is discussed, Chopin's. Chopin's singularity as a composer, and I should say she does it very much in brief, very much in passing in the discussion of the Romantic fragment. Chopin's singularity as a composer and pianist is what first struck contemporary audiences, including composers like Robert Schumann and the composer-pianist Ignaz Moscheles, who saw Chopin as the ultimate musical embodiment of the new Romantic conception of self. This understanding of Chopin quickly takes hold and becomes a trope in subsequent writings about Chopin, as when Rose Rosengard-Subotnick observes that in the entire history of Western music, I think it is fair to say that no composer has ever exceeded the extent to which Chopin infused the listening experience with his own identity, and that few have matched it. In his extensive published reviews of Chopin's music during the 1830s, Robert Schumann took us there first by increasingly sounding the refrain that only Chopin could write this music. Inspired directly and indirectly by the Jena Romantic writers, Chopin came of age emboldened to lean hard into his creative singularity. He was part of the Germanomania milieu in Warsaw, with his teachers, classmates, and closest friends steeped in the reading, exegesis, and translating into Polish for publication the writings of the Jena set. Particularly attractive to these artists, including Chopin, was Friedrich Schiller's assertion in his letters on the education of man from 1795 that political freedom is predicated on aesthetic freedom. This education anchored Chopin as he left Warsaw to launch his career as a composer and pianist, first in Vienna and then in Paris. Paris of the 1830s and 40s, during the period of government known as the July Monarchy, was the musical mecca of Europe. Upon arrival there, Chopin encountered a quality and range of music and musicians that was new and exciting to him. He soon made his mark as a composer and pianist, though he shied away from public performance, preferring instead to divide his time between composing and teaching. When Chopin did perform for others, it was most often in private homes, sometimes larger salons. Within several years of his arrival, being able to hear Chopin play was Paris's hot ticket. With this setup, let's turn to a clip from the 1991 film Impromptu, which imagines the writer Georges Sand, the pen name for Aurore Dudevant, first hear Chopin play his music. Here is the cast of characters we'll encounter in this clip. So we have Alfred de Musset, the poet, played by Mandy Patinkin, François Bouloz, the publisher by John Savident, Georges Sand by Judy Davis, Chopin by Hugh Grant, Franz Liszt by Julian Sands, the Countess Marie Daigou, many of you may have encountered her as the author Daniel Stern, by Bernadette Peters, Eugène Delacroix, the famous romantic painter by Ralph Brown, and the music that you'll hear being played is Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, Opus 23. The screenplay draws greatly on the writings of these characters, especially Sand in her rhapsodic prose style, and Dagu for her biting put-downs of Chopin, who is at the time making the career for himself as a composer that Dagu wants for Franz Liszt, her lover. For the purposes of this talk, note Sand's reaction whenever she hears Chopin's music. Note also the distinction between Chopin's approach to the piano and Liszt's approach to the piano. The clip is about 7 minutes long.
And only then when you'll get paid.
Thanks to you, I can't go to the Baroness's party. In fact, I'll have to leave Paris.
No more advances.
I don't need your money, old sow. I had an invitation to the country from a duchess, no less. Good day.
Dust is ruinous to my lungs. I hope the air will be better in Angers.
The Duchess Tantana's invited you too?
Ah, yes.
Oh, how delightful.
Please continue, dear fellow.
Good day, Countess.
Ah! George!
I'm sorry, I frightened you.
The most fearful dream. Young Dean was a terrible creature with fly's wings and was draining my life from me. They are deadly little charmers.
Chromatic glissando. The wings of a butterfly. Or the wrath of God.
He wakes the baby, then he complains the crying makes him crazy.
How is Franz?
He's a saint, sublime.
He'll even stay that way if you don't marry.
Yes, well, there's no danger of that. The Count won't divorce me. Since I left him, he won't even allow me to see the children.
Well, now you've begun a new family.
Still, I prefer to be married. I know you thumb your nose at all that.
It's funny. I used to think I'd die of suffocation when I was married. Now it's my freedom that's killing me.
Sophie! Now tell me, have you been invited to Angers next week? The Duke and Duchess d'Antin have asked us to their estate for a fortnight. Sophie! Where's that wretch? Please excuse me.
Franz?
I will see you.
You're not going to Angers too, Eugene. A whole fortnight among some tiresome old aristocrats.
Fortnight of free food, exquisite scenery, and no bills. And all you have to be is brilliant at dinner.
She doesn't seem bothered she's being eaten alive.
No,
She'd probably say, better to feel something than nothing.
even if it's teeth.
What a great honor you do my humble salon.
Delighted to meet you, Baroness. I'm actually looking for my publisher, Monsieur Boulot's.
Oh, he's in the salon with the others, but I'm afraid you'll have to wait to go in. Oh, I so long to meet you. I knew your father when he was young.
Really?
Oh, yes. We girls were enraged when we heard he married that dancer or whatever she was.
You mean my mother?
Of course. Is she still living?
Yes. But she's quite ill now.
Oh, how sad. And what a tragedy your father died so young. The Count de Saxe. So dashing. Oh, those idiots. Excuse me. Not yet! Precise time instructions. How could you listen? She hasn't finished playing it. I see it. Madame Song, is it true that you're writing a memoir?
Do you pray, Baroness?
Well, if you must know, I'm secretly devout.
Did you ever hear an answer?
To my prayers? Oh, no.
There is the answer.
Ah, you mean Monsieur Chopin? How clever. It's very rare to hear him play, you know. The Duchess d'Antin is having him for a whole fortnight at her house in Angers. I can only wish that I were a fly on the wall, except that they already have crowds of flies down there. I do find the provinces beastly. Ah, now, Monsieur Liszt will play next.
Ah, George, I read your...
George, you'll want to sit over here, my dear. All the respectable people are on the other side.
Could you point out Monsieur Chopin's one?
Chopin, but he left. Don't you know him? As frail as a holy wafer. Look at those hypocrites. They've been shunning me all evening. And I'm thrilled not to be one of them anymore. Their lives are so boring. You see, every single one is throbbing for him. They know perfectly well why I ran off with him.
For his teeth.
The Duchess of Danton right there, played by Emma Thompson. If you haven't seen the film, it's 90 minutes that's really well worth watching. Let's consider what we just watched. The first takeaway from this clip is how the sound of Chopin's music, that is Chopin playing his own piano compositions, hit people like a wallop. It arrested listeners time and again, and we know this from published criticism, as well as in diaries and letters from the time, that listeners speak to the uniqueness of Chopin's music. The second takeaway from this clip is that we are presented with two very different approaches to playing the piano, two different piano techniques. Liszt received formal piano instruction from the famous piano pedagogue Carl Czerny, who had studied with Beethoven. Liszt regards the piano as an orchestra in miniature and sought to translate orchestral effects to the piano. He lived a long life, taught many students, and decisively shaped the evolution of piano manufacture to create the robust, cross-strung, iron-framed instrument you see here today. Chopin was different. He received no such formal piano instruction, and from the time he was a teenager, Chopin's passion was opera and its singers. Yet, unlike any other prominent 19th century composer, he neither composed an opera nor ever sought to do so. Instead, Chopin chose to channel his love of opera and singing to music for solo piano, translating the expressive effect of the singing voice to the medium of a percussive keyboard instrument. My recent work on Chopin has been to study how his Warsaw philosophical education informed his approach to playing, composing for, and improvising on the piano, which were, for Chopin, one and the same activity. A philosophical rationale for Chopin's piano technique has not previously been considered. My talk today focuses on Chopin's piano technique. Unlike his contemporaries such as Liszt, Schumann, and Hector Berlioz, Chopin did not publish essays and criticism that attest to his philosophical positions, and his letters report rather than philosophize. In her later writings, George Sand speaks to this verbal reticence by recollecting a conversation between Delacroix and Chopin about art, in which Chopin shuns verbal philosophizing. Instead, Chopin responds to Delacroix's philosophical questions by improvising at the piano. For Chopin, making music was his philosophy. The work of Fryderyk Schiller, which was central to Chopin's education, provided not only Polish artist-patriots with a rationale for aligning political freedom with aesthetic freedom, also provided Chopin with a rationale for an unorthodox piano technique that privileged suppleness and ease over strength and power. For Schiller, the metaphor of dance served as a necessary bridge between the mind and the body, what Schiller called the play impulse. Here is Schiller in his letters on the aesthetic education of man. Take specialization here to mean piano technique. Thus, however much the world as a whole may benefit through this fragmentary specialization of human powers, it cannot be denied that the individuals affected by it suffer under the curse of this cosmic purpose. Athletic bodies can, it is true, be developed by gymnastic exercises, beauty only through the free and harmonious play of the limbs. Inspired by the writings of Schiller, Chopin developed a technique to make the piano sing, not to make it thunder like an orchestra. Schiller exerted an influence on Chopin throughout his life. In Paris, those who knew Chopin best, like Sand and his cherished pupil Fryderyk Müller, likened Chopin to Schiller and vice versa. In what follows, I will consider Chopin's approach to playing and composing for the piano, the type of piano he composed for, and finally, the legacy of Chopin's technique and music up through World War II, suggesting, in line with Schiller's philosophy, that Chopin's aesthetic revolution sets the groundwork for, if not political revolution, then political resistance. An important early fact that fuels Chopin's artistic independence is that his piano teacher was, principally, a violinist. This led Chopin to develop an idiosyncratic approach to playing the piano, one that was body sensible, taking the body as it is instead of attempting to improvise, instead of attempting to improve it. For example, whereas all existing published piano methods from the 18th century and the 19th century took the lead of music theory by placing all beginning exercises in C major, here are some of the more famous examples. Chopin considered the key of C major to be the most difficult key to play in and reserved it for later study. Instead, Chopin began his students in the 5-sharp key of B major, where the longer digits are placed on the black keys and the shorter digits on the white keys, thereby encouraging a natural, relaxed hand position. I'm at the piano, and how many of you, just out of curiosity, have taken at least a piano lesson? Okay, that's a good showing. How many of you started in the key of C major? Okay, most of you did, yeah. Well, I did as well. I remember playing Carl Czerny, who taught Liszt, and my sister Electa, who taught me, she had studied with a pupil of Liszt's, and so it goes back to Beethoven. But it really is this post-Kantian idealist thinking of how can we master the body, not how we can take the body, and Chopin's was an enfeebled body. He was sick his entire adult life, where it was and accommodate for it. But simply, if you put the hands on the white keys between the E and the B of B major, your three longest fingers fall on the black keys. And this position is the relaxed hand position. So it was all about what was natural. The kinds of turns and contortions of the body that are required in playing the key of C major are ungainly, and for Chopin, not natural. At the same time, Chopin, and we could go on at great length just about aspects of his technique, but he understood the inherent inequality of the fingers and never tried to do the 4 and 5 exercise and 3 and 4. That's actually a device that Schumann used to do that for his hands, wrecked his right hand forever, and he couldn't play. Many people, again, coming from a German idealist thinking, tried to master the body, make all the fingers equal. Chopin said, that's stupid. The fingers aren't equal, and work with it. So he would slide the fingers, cross the fingers over one another, 4 over 5, 3 over 4, all things that were not done at the time. Okay, so because for Chopin, playing the piano, improvising, and composing were inseparable activities, his published compositions favored keys with many sharps and flats. Music meant to be navigated by his unorthodox, body-sensible technique. Those who approached playing his works from a different technique could be left confused or frustrated. Prominent German critics like Ludwig Wellstab and G.W. Fink initially refused to review Chopin's music because they deemed it too difficult. Pianist composers like Ignaz Moscheles only came to understand Chopin's notational practice upon seeing and hearing Chopin play his own works. This happens again and again. This happens with Schumann when Chopin comes to Leipzig and Chopin hears him. Suddenly a light goes off. This is Moscheles writing from Paris in October of 1839. He played to me at my request, and now do I understand his music, and as well as the enthusiasm of the ladies. His ad libitum playing, and this is where my slide picks up, his ad libitum playing, which with other interpreters tends to degenerate into a mere lack of rhythm, in his hands is the most graceful and original feature of the discourse. The harsh, amateurish modulations which I stumble over when playing his compositions no longer shock me because his delicate fingers glide over them with elfin lightness. His piano is breathed for so softly that he needs no vigorous forte to produce the desired effects. So one does not miss the orchestral effects which the German school demands from a pianist, but allows oneself to be carried away as by a singer who, untroubled by the accompaniment, gives full rein to his feelings. Enough. He is unique to the piano world. Part of the disconnect between Chopin's scores and the way he played them is that he never played his music the same way twice. And after being chastised by a critic in an 1834 review of Chopin's Opus 15 nocturnes for, quote, a kind of affectation to write music almost as one should execute it, Chopin ceases to try to transcribe in such a sonic graphic way the rhythm of his musical ideas. Here the critic is referring to the middle section of the second nocturne of this opus. And I'll play it for you. Just a little bit before this middle section, this is Doppio Movimento, and you can see, for those of you who read notation, it's rhythmically, it's quite subtle and complex, and this is what the reviewer thought was silly. You just put rubato, slap rubato on it, and write it in a straightforward way, and trying to capture precisely how it should be played. Oh, sorry, that went here. So this is the end of the A section. It's generally an A, B, A prime form. The end of the A section as we approach the doppio movimento. This is what the 1834 critic was saying. Why is Chopin writing his music this way? The reason he wrote it this way, because there was a frustration in writing music that people weren't playing with his technique or in the way that he intended it. But he does soon, he abandons this after this time, the middle of the 1830s. The more common refrain about Chopin's music and how he writes and performs it is sounded by the French composer Hector Berlioz in December of 1833 in a review of a concert at the Conservatoire at which Chopin played. Unfortunately, virtually nobody but Chopin himself can play his music and give it this unusual turn. This sense of the unexpected, which is one of its principal beauties. His interpretation is shot through with 1,000 nuances of movement of which he alone holds this secret and which are impossible to convey by instructions. There are unbelievable details in his mazurkas, and he has found how to render them doubly interesting by playing them with the utmost degree of softness, piano in the extreme, the hammers merely brushing the strings, so much so that one is tempted to go close to the instrument and put one's ear to it as if to a concert of sylphs or elves. The instrument to which Berlioz is referring is a Pleyel piano, which was the instrument Chopin composed on and composed for, whether an upright or a grand. The Pleyel pianos of the 1830s and 40s were markedly different from the Erard piano favored by Liszt, which was a forerunner of the pianos today. And in that same publication I mentioned called The Pianist, from 1833, they have an article about the Erard and about the Pleyel, and they put Chopin as being someone who plays on the Pleyel in that camp, and Liszt and his music in the Erard camp. Think of the Erard again as a proto-Steinway. Now, just to point out a few things very quickly, this, if you open it up, could see the hood. It has an iron frame. The Pleyel pianos of the day were all wooden frame, wooden in construction. These strings, the iron frame was able to hold the tautness so you could get more volume, and they're crossed so you get the reverberation at the warmest part of the soundboard back here. The other thing that you have is an equaling out of the tone across registers, and that's affected by what is called the striking points here, an aspect of piano manufacture. You had dampers that fell by gravity, not through a function. So dampening was often soft, and you would get this little haze, this little harmonic buzz sometimes, which people liken to, you heard Berlioz's description, but the Aeolian harp or a glass harmonica. You had different pedals, and the one could really produce an una corda effect, a one-string effect, would shift all of the hammers so that you're only playing one string, and the effect of that was something that music coming from another room. So there are many ways in which this modern piano, and I should say that the Pleyel had very distinct colors in its 4 registers. And I'll playing for you a clip of that so that you can hear, but between middle C and about an octave and a 6 above it, this A, where most of Chopin's melodies hang, is the warmest, most bell-like quality. It often evoked the adjective of argentine or silvery or bell-like. It's in this range. Then it thins out in the upper register. It's more muted. You get a different color in the tenor or lower alto register, and then there's a rumble in the bass. You would have to play a number of different compositions in order to convey this, but I'll give you some sense of how that bell-like register sounds, it almost sounds like a zither when you hear it. So let's first then listen to a mazurka played on a Pleyel Grand. This is by Janusz Olejniczak, the pianist, an 1831 Pleyel Grand. And I want you to hear in particular when it goes from a high register to a low register, how it's coursing through not just different pitches, but different tone colors. Well, let's listen to that. The A section returns, and you'll hear then in the coda to it going up very high, and I'll point it out, and you'll hear it course across the different registers, and there you'll really be able to hear how it thins out in the way upper register before encountering that belt-like warm soprano register here. The bell-like register. Now, the third time it'll go really high and it'll get flat. And it warms up a little bit as it comes down into that bell-like register. We know from Chopin's letters when he goes to Mallorca with your song, and it's in the winter of 1839. It's supposed to improve his health. It turns out to be disastrous. He hemorrhages severely from his tuberculosis and almost dies there. And that's where he writes his preludes. And he also, he writes his preludes on his Pleyel pianino, this one, and he's waiting for it to arrive from Paris. And meanwhile, he's stuck with this inferior instrument that just happens to be in the monastery where he's staying. And we know this because he dated the manuscript, and we know from the correspondence with his publishers and friends in Paris, and he's complaining about his pianino not arriving, and we know that this was written before. And you see the disposition of it is unlike the other mazurkas, even the ones in this opus. It stays here. And it really just stays in that orbit. In the middle section it goes, this is as far as it goes. So, sorry, middle section. And it really stays just in this register, and it doesn't venture out of this middle zone. He doesn't exploit any of that, and you see then that that's very much reserved for, just from the other ones in this collection of four, that he then, when the Pleyel pianino arrives, he composes with that sound in mind. This was the pianino, the upright version of the grand that he had. As Berlioz makes plain in his review of Chopin's music, Chopin set himself apart in taking on established genres such as the mazurka and the nocturne and revising the way that the public thought about them, not only in the way they were composed, but also in the way Chopin rendered them on the play piano. After Chopin's death in 1849, the rapid homogenization of piano manufacturing design effectively erased the distinctive qualities of the play pianos that Chopin favored. Unlike Liszt's legion of piano students who spread his pedagogy across the globe, those students who could propagate Chopin's piano technique were few. Most of Chopin's students were aristocratic women for whom a career as a professional pianist was not deemed an option. One notable exception was the Polish pianist Karol Mikuli. Mikuli taught Chopin's technique not only to prominent pianists like Raoul Kochalski, whose audio recordings we have as a tangible link to the Chopin tradition, but also the most influential music theorist of the 20th century, Heinrich Schenker. Schenker studied piano with Mikuli for 10 years at the Gymnasium in Lemberg. Schenker's theoretical writings and editorial practice in the 1910s and 1920s revised the collective understanding of Chopin as a miniaturist who was limited to writing for the piano to a composer of the highest order, Chopin as hero. This dramatic and lasting reassessment of Chopin took place just in time for Chopin's music to be summoned as the Polish national music of resistance during Nazi occupation. Schenker, an Austrian Jew, would not live to witness this reassessment. He died in 1935. His writings were banned by the Nazis, and his wife, who was the principal champion of his work, was transported to Theresienstadt in June of 1942 and died there in January of 1945. In 1999, I made my first visit to Poland, and there I was introduced by a mutual friend to a medical doctor who was told with fanfare that she was the wife of the pianist Władysław Szpilman. I did not know who Szpilman was. I was told he was a popular Polish Jewish performer on Polish radio who was playing Chopin on air right before the studio was bombed by the Nazis on September 23rd, 1939. I was told that all his family members were murdered during the war and he alone survived, wandering and attempting to stay alive in bombed-out buildings throughout Warsaw. I was told he wrote about his experience in a memoir published right after the war. When I met Szpilman's widow on a return visit to Poland, I never met Szpilman, who died in the year of 2000. In 2002, Szpilman's story became known to the world when his 1946 memoir was turned into the Academy Award-winning film directed by the Polish director Roman Polanski, The Pianist. The film earned Adrian Brody his first Oscar for playing Szpilman. The following clip is the emotional climax of the film, a scene that Szpilman movingly recounts in his memoir. It is towards the end of the war, and Szpilman is a haunted shadow of his former self. He is wandering through an abandoned home, discovers a can of pickles, and starts to try to open it with fireplace irons when he is suddenly interrupted. The version you just heard is the same piece we heard in the earlier clip from Impromptu, Chopin's Ballade in G minor. In the earlier clip, Chopin was playing. In this clip, Szpilman is playing, but in his playing of Chopin, Szpilman channels Chopin's technique. Alexander Mikołowski was one of Chopin's, Mikuli's, Karol Mikuli's. Mikuli, remember, was Chopin's pupil who lived maturity. One of his most prominent teachers. He taught at the conservatory in Warsaw. Szpilman studies with Mikołowski. and is a transmitter of the Chopin technique and Chopin's approach to playing the piano. And then the other officer, Wilhelm Hosenfeld, was a German officer, and the piece being played was the Ballade in G minor. In a movie that is a testament to the power of the individual, Chopin's music is apt, not only because Spielmann championed it, but also because Chopin, as a reader of Schiller, believed that aesthetic freedom begets political freedom. It all comes down to the courageous acts of individuals. Robert Schumann had long before cited the revolution contained in Chopin's compositions, which Schumann called, quote, cannons concealed among flowers, end quote. As a composer and pianist, Chopin leaned into his individuality to write music and develop a piano technique that will guide Spielmann in his career and serve at the critical moment in Spielmann's life that we just watched as a bridge to Spielmann's freedom. Spielmann's Chopin performance for Wilhelm Hosenfeld inspired Hosenfeld to look after Spielmann for the remainder of the war. Spielmann credited Hosenfeld for saving his life. Hosenfeld died in 1952, received the Righteous Among the Nations title from Yad Vashem in 2009, not only for saving Spielmann, but for other Jews in Warsaw at the time. So that's all. Thank you, and I welcome your questions. The first movie is Impromptu. And what's wonderful about this film, so it's down at the very bottom in the corner, what's wonderful about this film is that it's a farce, and it has wonderful actors, but for a farce, it gets a whole lot right. It's drawing, and so Marie Dagout, for instance, she says in her letters, she actually writes it, I've read it, you know, that Chopin is as thin as frail as a holy wafer. She also has said things like, the only thing permanent about Chopin is his cough. You know, these lines and that sensibility are really in all of the writings, and so what it does is it plops you into that milieu in which Chopin was living, so I do recommend it. Yes?
Are there any contemporary pianists that come close to mimicking Chopin's sound?
That's an excellent question, and I would say few do. There are ones who are wonderful, but there are a lot of things that were particular about Chopin in the way he taught that you just don't hear. But Kochalski, who's on record, you do hear. And the one thing, I'll just point out one aspect, is that for rubato for Chopin, he took the 18th century practice where it was a little bit of rubbing your tummy and hitting your head. The hand should be independent, and the left hand should be the accompanist in strict time, and it's the right hand that will rush forward or slow down like a singer. But the left hand was the metronome. And so to drill this with his students, he would have his students, say of a nocturne, just take the left hand part, and Chopin would play only the right hand part, and then they would switch. And then they would do that repeatedly to get this sense of the Chopin rubato that he was going after. But there are, Daniel Trifonov is a really wonderful pianist today. And there certainly are wonderful pianists. I think a lot of it is hard, and I know some pianists. I'm editing a volume right now on performance practice in the keyboard practice in the 19th century, and there's this wonderful Australian pianist who's writing for it, who's a scholar, who works on just period instruments and how do you translate the effect of Chopin's playels to the modern instrument. And it's not easy, and a lot of people haven't done that labor, and that's why I think you don't really, the playel piano was such a particular kind of mechanism that, for instance, Chopin students always wanted to play on it because they said like, oh, Chopin, you do such great things there. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but they would play and they would want to do it, and then it was so unwieldy and ungainly. And the reason is, I liken it to the effect of a single edge razor to one of those quad 5 razors, and that you get the readiness of the 5 blades and smooth, and you don't have to worry about it. But if you really want a close shave, and you really want, you have to be in the expert hands of a single blade. And with Chopin, we have him saying to several of his students who've recorded it, that if I'm tired, a little bit out of sorts, and I want a ready-made sound, I turn to my Erard piano. He had an Erard, a Broadwood, and 2 Pleyels in his studio. But if I really want to express my precise musical ideas exactly as I feel, I turn to my Pleyel, because it is only with the Pleyel that I can really express myself. And so it was much more of a labor, but it was much more pliable. And one is because you had not a double escapement mechanism, which was more of an apparatus for the hammer, but you had a single escapement mechanism, which you had in touching the key much more of a direct contact with the string itself.
Can you tell us a little bit about Chopin's youth? When did he begin playing the piano? Why did he begin playing the piano?
Yeah, good question. He began playing the piano in part because that's what his mother played the piano, and she, not his father, but his mother played the piano. She was a lovely singer. She was not professional. She was Polish. She was the one who sang mazurkas, which are song dances, and would sing a lot to him. And that's what started, but he developed a really early affinity for making music and composing music, and for caricature and art and imitation. He had a creative mind, which was strongly encouraged by his parents. His father, who emigrated to Poland as a young man, he was hired in various capacities and going up the ranks as an official French tutor. So Chopin was, because his father would tutor some of the aristocratic homes, the aristocratic children and people of a higher class, he was brought into that orbit, and he was exposed to people who had much more of that musical education. And so he both grew up bilingual, but he also was exposed to this musical education, which was strongly encouraged by his teachers, his composition teacher. As I said, his piano teacher was actually a violin teacher who had keyboard skills enough to give Chopin, but he was largely self-taught. And when he went to Paris, so many of his friends and family said, make sure you don't get one of the big impressive pedagogues to take you, unlike Kalkbrenner, to take you under their wing and ruin what you did. And sure enough, when he arrived in Paris, he was had just turned 21, and a lot of people approached him, say, come and study with me, because they were big names, but he stuck to his guns and really just developed his own technique.
So thank you so much. This was excellent.